Alrighty, hello every folks, and welcome to a review for Unicorn Overlord. So I'm a couple of hundred hours into the game at this point, several playthroughs deep, and I wanted to finally put out a review of my thoughts on this absolutely incredible game. Okay, so first and foremost, a few things that I want to get out of the way just for a little bit of context. As to my background on this whole thing, I've been covering the Ogre Battle series and Tactics Ogre in particular for a very long time. Those may seem like entirely different things, but the Tactics Ogre games originally were what was known as Ogre Battle. It's what this game is essentially bringing back to life. A formula in which you have your standard SRPG kind of people and whatnot. However, all of your orders are carried out kind of ahead of time. You give all of your units specific orders, telling them like in the case of those units back there, where the guy with the ranged sword is supposed to target only flyers or healers, or specifically there's going to be like archers that have an ability to attack a healer before they end up healing, or specifically have some units that are made to break down defenses while somebody else follows up. Maybe somebody has a flaming arrow on their bow, and they can fire that onto a unit with a wizard that has a staff that allows it to then take that fire and ignite it across the entire party. Essentially, building up these interesting combinations and having them try to carry out these orders ahead of time, it's a very unusual, unique little, unicorn of a thing here. And this comparison is not surface deep. The folks that made this, like Vanillaware, they have this unusual gift of being able to just kind of go and friggin' just march their way into a genre they've never tried before and whoop its ass. And that's exactly what they've done here. Because the Ogre Battle formula has been essentially dormant for the last 25 years. There have been some attempts at something similar in the form of, let's say, something like Symphony of War there, which was honestly going. It tried. For an indie project, it was one hell of an impressive thing, but nobody has fully done the Ogre Battle thing up till now. And like, granted, again, there were some. Like, if you squint, you'll see it kind of moments, but none have just gone full, just like full face first into this particular formula because it's very unusual. And I want to point out they didn't just take this formula and try to copy it for those nostalgia dollars. They just went up there and they're like, here is just our whole ass. We have put everything into this. Not only have they taken the classic Ogre Battle formula and improved the hell out of it, they've taken a FF12 style gambit system in the form of those orders there, essentially allowing you to get insanely nitty gritty with the commands that you give all of your people. You know what orders to attack in, how to customize every one of them. There isn't official cross-classing, but there is absolutely cross-classing. Like, basically a combination of your items, your commands, your specific timings. Like, you specifically can put in a lot of competitive Pokemon strategies to your squads here, and in many ways it feels like in both difficulty as well as the kind of challenge runs that'll work for it, as well as other things, it effectively feels like if you were going and just doing like let's say like 10 Nuzlockes of Pokemon Emerald at the same time. That's what some of the maps feel like. And it's such a special game, quite frankly. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. A lot of assessments that have come out there. You might have noticed an interesting little kind of bipolarity to a lot of the reviews, where you've got most that are going to be praising the hell of it for like, wow, this art is really good. The animations, the visuals, the overall game flow is absolutely god tier. And then you have those other ones who are like, the story kind of sort of exists, I guess, and you kind of auto battle a lot of things. So let me explain a couple things. First of all, again, those battles are more about prediction more so than automation. Every single thing that your units do, you have 100% control over. It's up to you to figure out how to harness that to your benefit. The reason that you watch the fights isn't just for the pretty animations, but to see who is performing how, when, and where. By the time you get in a few hours into this thing, you're usually skipping every battle with the start button, but you know that they're going to perform. And understanding how your units perform and cooperate with each other is how you end up getting those big steamroll wins and stuff like that. It's part of the reason that if you get into the multiplayer for this one, some of the teams you run into are absolutely diabolical, where you'll end up having your entire squad wiped. Man. Sorry, I accidentally muted myself there. But yeah, a lot of the online teams turn out to be absolutely just utterly diabolical with the amount of counters and funny things that you can do. Okay, so let me get into this here, because these battles aren't even the full experience. Essentially, the actual world design of this game is very Souls-like, as odd as this sounds. I mean, it's been a comparison that has been, made to death for everything because, frankly, everything can be compared to a FromSoft game at this point. Good God, they are absolutely prolific. But yeah, when it comes to Unicorn Overlord, it legitimately has a world that is interconnected. It has shortcuts to areas that you can go and access early. It actually will have different events that play out if you approach areas from different directions and whatnot. There's many maps that you can go and essentially go and ambush from different directions. There's a lot of little interactions where you're just given freedom of choice that you wouldn't have expected. Like, do you take on one army or the other, or do you just decide to go and fight all of them at once? Do you, there's a city with a bunch of gates. Which direction are you planning to approach it from? That sort of thing. And depending on world events, depending on people in your party, depending on stuff you've done, it's constantly adapting in little ways. And what's interesting is it came from that original Ogre Battle formula, which was more so about the politics. And I feel like many of the kind of folks that were putting down the story did end up kind of expecting more of that they were expecting more Matsuno level politics. Look, nobody writes Matsuno level politics. That is a, like, strictly an IRPG and or Matsuno game type of writing hell that they put themselves into. Because for those that have never played an Ogre Battle game, we're talking about games where they will constantly adapt to, like, characters living and dying and whatever else. Like situations where, like, for example, let's take our Dio guy over in Ogre Battle 64. He's kind of your unwitting rival buddy character from the start, right? And if you, for example, decide to be nice to him, he'll just be your best buddy. If you decide to be kind of neutral with him, he'll be kind of an ass, but he'll still stick with you through the story. But if you decide to if you just decide to shut him down at every opportunity, he'll end up becoming a boss. If you, for example, walk into your first tutorial and let him get killed and zombified in the first encounter he runs into, he's just gone for cutscenes now. They just find other ways around his dialogue for the entire game. This guy that was supposed to be there from start to finish is just gone 5 minutes in. Again, that was what Ogre Battle did. Like, heavy, like, properly fleshed out political writing, as well as a constantly adapting story. And the thing is, again, very few teams are able to make that stick. So what happened here with Unicorn Overlord is that they said, okay, look, we're not exactly going to be, we're not going to be scratching that particular itch in that particular way. So what they did was they leaned into the kind of more mystical elements, as well as the character writing. Because the character writing is better than it has any possible right to be, quite frankly. There were moments of relationship drama that spoke way too true to life for anyone that's out there that's been married for a while. There have been moments between characters that were awkward in a way that is just absolute frickin' perfection. They managed to do the whole thing of actually having relationships between all of your named characters. However, unlike Fire Emblem, which, it does its own thing, unlike Fire Emblem, they never get weird with it. Like, what's funny is that, okay, they do get intentionally weird in some cases, but in most situations, it is surprisingly wholesome. It is surprisingly well done. Like, there isn't a, oh man, look, they're all lovey-dovey, smooch, go do your thing over there. No, we're talking about cases where legitimately it feels like your people are going and, properly building up long-term relationships in the background. It's surprising to see that happening. Whether it's things like having a couple of your knights fix their long dead marriage, or having people that are completely unrelated going and figuring out that maybe they don't hate each other so much, and in other cases they legitimately just find out that they hate each other, or those moments where, for example, if you decide to pair up your main character and one of their retainers from the start of the game, they just end up more or less teaching them manners for a while before realizing, hey, you know what, maybe they kind of get along a little bit. Or let's say you don't even have to pair up your main character with the girls. I mean, if you wanted a surprisingly wholesome story, just go ahead and pair up your main character with their guard knight guy. Like, yeah, no, you want a story that surprisingly brings a tear to your eye of a dad learning how much he loves to be a dad? Like, it's, again, surprisingly well done. In every direction, it's surprisingly well done. Like, this game is a marvel. It is an absolute freaking masterpiece of a game. Frankly, it's one that I expect to see stick the kind of the test of time, because it has been made with love with every single fiber of its being, like every little detail. Notice even the boards right here on the screen here, where your units will actually function differently depending on their footing. Again, just like an ogre game would, where certain units are just better on certain types of footing, and even these little chessboards are fleshed out. Okay, to give you an idea of what they actually carried forward from Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen, as well as Ogre Battle 64. Basically, they took everything that worked and they distilled it into this kind of beautiful amalgamation of ideas. I know I'm rambling a little bit. I apologize. I just can't help but gush about this game. And what you're seeing is a weird challenge run where I was trying to do only fighters in the background. It's a whole other thing. We'll get to the Iron Man run that I was doing on Chosen Orient after this. But anyways, so like even these little tiles are fleshed out. But in terms of what it takes from Ogre Battle, the 2x3 grid is something that came from March of the Black Queen, effectively being what seems to be a simple combination at first. But you might be wondering why they didn't take the 9 tile grid from Ogre Battle 64. I'll just go ahead and sum that up by saying, you know what, the modding community for Ogre Battle 64 is still trying to find a use for that middle row. They still haven't really gotten there yet. So, basically, it was an extra thing that they tried for one of the entries. It didn't really do very much. And also, just for the sake of kind of a small reference here, technically there were 3 Ogre Battle games, but Prince of Zenobia mostly just kind of exists. Anyway, all right, so getting back to it. So, what I want to point out is, at first I thought that the music was just kind of a nod to a lot of the classics. Like, you'll notice, if you are an Ogre Battle fan, you'll notice that there's themes that sound very similar to Limitation from Ogre Battle. A lot of the themes and more kind of official meetings and things like that sound very Tactics Ogre. A lot of the battle themes sound incredibly similar to Final Fantasy Tactics, and it's constantly kind of hopping between doing its own music thing, like you're hearing in the background, but then also occasionally they'll just have those little beautiful flourishes of something to reference back to the classics. I mean, hell, the fact that the ending just kind of decides to go riff into into "We Are the Champions" by Queen, just kind of out of nowhere. Just chef's kiss moment of absolutely understanding what made the originals work. For the sake of a little bit of a reference, basically back in the day, every ogre game for whatever reason just had to have a bunch of Queen references. Don't question it; it's tradition. Damn it. Okay, so let's get back to it here. So, as I mentioned, the world design is very Souls-esque. There's a lot of shortcuts, there's a lot of interaction with the world, and one of the main questions that comes up from folks that only, for example, played the first couple hours and then left a bad review, God, them folks are frustrating, is like, oh, you know, they're not going and counterattacking you guys, oh my god, it's so unrealistic, and surprisingly, now hear me out here, they thread that needle. You may be thinking, like, oh, it was just a forgotten plot point. Oh, no. They frickin' thread that needle. They actually make it work. I mean, originally, I was similarly of that opinion that it seemed like they were going for kind of tropey stuff in the early game. They subvert all that. They actually twist all of it on its head in surprisingly interesting ways. I mean, I'm not saying that the writing is, again, politics-orientated. That's more Matsuno's shtick. The guy came from a journalistic background, so he's all about the politics. This game is all about the character moments and bringing everything full circle. And they make it work. They make it happen. Again, every character dialogue that I've seen, every discussion that I've seen between the characters, eventually does end up twisting those kind of standard tropes on their head. Does actually end up doing something fun with the characters, does tend to look into a lot of surprisingly realistic aspects to their characters in general. It just makes everything feel more alive. I mean, the whole thing feels like a friggin' Homerian epic at times in terms of what it's trying to look like, what it's trying to feel like. Some of the characters are exaggerated, but they're exaggerated to give you an idea of what their deal is. I mentioned before that this is kind of similar to competitive Pokemon in its battles, and frankly, a lot of the visuals are the same way. Like, you see a gladiator that's ripped as God knows what, and it makes sense moments that they're able to just flex and get their health back. You see, your more agile cavalry and stuff like that. Like, yeah, they actually make use of all that heavy armor they're carrying around. Your standard fighters look like they'd be able to, pretty nimbly deal with a lot of arrows and flyers. And sure enough, their main gimmick is being able to deal with anything that comes from the sky. But the battles themselves are not only expansive, but they're very interesting in terms of their objectives and whatever else. And this is another one of those things that thankfully has not come up very much in other reviews, but it is something that I want to bring to mind here. Like, for example, in most cases, yes, technically, in most maps, the objective will be to go secure one area. However, getting there is a whole other story. Who you can recruit along the way, who you can interact with along the way, the ways that you can interact with the world in general, those are more expansive than they seem. Every one of your choices has more of a difference than it actually seems. Where, like, for example, in my first playthrough, there was one of the not this lady, but there was one of the clerics that you can pick up early on, who I ended up just kind of saying was too dangerous to bring along. Missed an entire side content thing with her there. There were a ton of moments where, just for basically RPG reasons, I had executed off certain characters, which that's one of those commands that you can do. That once you beat an enemy commander, you're usually given the choice of, do you want to recruit this person or execute them. And you'd think that this would be a completely binary, one choice is better than the other kind of situation. It's like, oh, you take a character or you take an item, but not really, because your generic mercenaries can be just as strong if you're only caring about the units, or those items might be completely worthless to you, or in most cases, it's literally just about the roleplay type of stuff, where, like, for example, my first playthrough, I ended up killing off one of the fan-favorite characters, because it seemed like she would probably come back and cause relationship drama. She probably doesn't, but it certainly felt that way. There are moments like, for example, this lady right here just ended up getting killed off and never getting recruited. But again, all of these little interactions, they do come back. They do actually, they do end up paying these off. They love to do this thing where it seems like they're going to go the tropey route, and then they end up going and dodging that bullet at the last second. Again, it's masterful, quite frankly. The way that they pull off most of this stuff is absolutely masterful. And every complaint that I have seen about this game almost immediately, rightfully, gets shut down by most of the other comments there, because there's so much stuff to misunderstand. Like these cases where, okay, like you go into a fight and you're potentially going and, dealing with a lot of these mobs somewhat easily. It's almost like they're mobs or something. There are cases where it seems like, okay, look, these individual fights, not exactly crazy difficult, but also you only have 4 or 5 functional squads at this point, and you have to be holding down 6 checkpoints to actually win the objective. Or you have those cases where there's just fun map interactions, like, for example, one of the abilities that your units can use, as well as can be triggered by the map itself, is for a rainstorm to form and heal up your units. And on paper, this just seems like, oh, it's healing mechanic. Okay, all well and good. And then you run into those maps where there's fire, and you can use it to go put out fires. Or those moments where there's tornadoes. So do you use those tornadoes to throw enemies off of objectives? Do you use them to hold off certain checkpoints because there's just insane amounts of reinforcements coming from somewhere? I mean, many of there's an entire continent that's just all were something or others. I like to call it were Canada, where you got like were bears, were wolves, were owls, were rats, were cats, every freaking thing that you can possibly imagine. And again, they just have a ton of fun with it. Like they have those moments where previously up to that point, your cavalry were primarily your main momentum units, where they would get additional attacks if they scored a kill with their main charging attacks. And then you get the werewolves that are like, oh, they get a bonus if they overpower the enemy. If they end up seeing a weakness, they get to attack again. If they outnumber them, they get to attack again. If it's night, they get to attack again. And it's like one of these cases where those individual hits are not necessarily that strong, but as soon as they find that opening, oh man, something is getting torn inside out. Like it's just great to see so much character put into every one of these characters, every one of these classes. Every one of them has so many little bits and pieces to them. Like, to give you an idea of just this beautiful combination of mechanics and story and whatever else, they took an Ogre Battle mechanic in terms of if you have a particular movement type on a squad, that you can utilize that movement type for different things. Now, in March of the Black Queen, this was a case where, like, if you stuck a Hawkman or a Gryphon into a squad, they all just flew. Now it doesn't matter who the leader is. In Ogre Battle 64, they decided to kind of nerf this because it was super overpowered. They decided to nerf it a bit by saying, okay, look, if you have an entire squad of flyers, then they can fly. Otherwise, everybody else is stuck to the ground. What they've done in Unicorn Overlord is something along the lines of meeting it in the middle, where the leader is the one that determines the movement type. So, for example, right here, I have a squad leader that is a Gryphon. That means that this squad is able to fly. However, it's also hindered by the movement of everybody else in the team. So if they run all cavalry, they're going to still move reasonably fast, but they're not going to have a ton of support. If they're given clerics, they slow right the hell down. And additionally, their actual stamina is a bit lower than everybody else, being able to only engage an enemy 4 times before they have to take a rest. And that's actually another interesting mechanic I want to bring up here, because the logistics of this game are handled with, God, it's handled with such grace. God, it's so good. So, okay, here's the thing: the Ogre Battle games constantly struggled with figuring out a way to kind of limit your units from fighting forever. Because in March of the Black Queen, that is legitimately what you would do. You would just make the death dot and then just steamroll your way through a map as one squad is taking out hundreds of soldiers at a time. Which worked, again, in its context. It was trying to be more like a board game kind of thing, more of a simulation kind of thing. And for the most part, it worked, but there were those moments that once you got your complete ace squads going, you got your Princess Lich kind of combos happening. Like Princess Lich and Gryphon was probably my favorite one my first time through. You could just steamroll to your heart's content. Like, you could literally just make an invincible unit that just killed everything. In Ogre Battle 64, though, they added a stamina system in which units would get tired out over time, and would only be able to fight so many times, and if they got too tired, they would just fall asleep. And if they were asleep, the enemy got the initiative on them, and they typically would tear them to pieces. So oftentimes it became a thing of, like, you take out the enemy commander in order to decapitate the squad, to leave them completely dead in the water, and then you tire them out until they fall asleep, and then you ambush them until they're dead. Which, again, is fun in its context. However, in this particular case, they took it, again, kind of a middle road type of direction. Where if you, for example, end up attacking a unit and they're completely tired out, they will still be able to fight normally. And if you have friendly units nearby to swap with, you could essentially throw your tired squads at a nearby enemy to have them fight normally, despite the fact that they're too tired to move. Now, the reason that this works, the reason that this actually feels good to play, is because, again, they can't go on the offensive. They can't do anything extra, but they're also not getting overwhelmed by trash. However, that trash is still enough to completely blunt an offensive. That regardless of how strong your team is, if you're playing on expert or above, they will only ever be able to take 6 fights before they're dead in the water. If for example, they end up getting tired, they just end up sitting there. But if they end up in a position where, let's say, they end up trying to take a rest to get their stamina back to move again, they're potentially going to just end up dying instead, because when you end up getting attacked while sleeping, you basically take a huge loss to every one of your skills. You start off with less points. They get to get the initiative on you. They usually get torn to pieces. And that figuring out that timing of sending out your other squads to go cover for the one that's resting, or having them garrison the tower to rest faster, or having them withdraw and then pull out a mercenary commander to be able to garrison their health back faster. It is a very special feeling. Like, they managed to, again, achieve perfection in a formula that has been long dormant. Resting your units feels incredibly satisfying when you pull it off correctly. And to this end, I would like to point out that for folks that are trying out the demo to learn this game for yourself, please try it on expert. Frankly, the only negative I have to say about this game is that a lot of the easier difficulties exist, because anything kind of a tactical and down does not have item limits, and it also typically doesn't let you engage with as many of the mechanics. So, for example, stuff like expert means that you can only use 10 items in a fight. And these items are incredibly powerful. So if you lose units, you may potentially be losing them for the rest of the fight. If you are looking at the timer, you actually have to pay attention to that thing. If you are potentially running into a situation where you're completely overwhelmed by sheer numbers, there are going to be those cases where you're going to want to potentially put down some mines or some barricades, or put up some defensive manlets with some archer support, and you can't do all of them. You have to pick and choose what'll end up working for you. You know. So that's the thing. The easier difficulties, I feel like that did go a little bit too far with being a bit too easy. That's not a gatekeeping kind of thing. It's just that so many more mechanics matter on Expert and Truzen, which is basically the not quite New Game Plus, but it also kind of is mode. Anyway, so with that being said, let's go ahead and circle back to the writing, because when it came to the writing in this game, again, it seemed like it was just going to be kind of generic fluff from the get go. Like, oh, it's all mind control. It's all just evil dudes being evil. But again, they they pull it off surprisingly elegantly. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to say exactly what happens, but they do tie everything together. All of these fights that you're doing, they there's this big aha moment once you end up kind of going for the true ending. And frankly, most SRPGs that I've seen do not manage to thread that needle. Like for example, something like Triangle Strategy there tried to go for a similar aha moment, but it resulted in this awkward thing of rediscovering the same information multiple times back to back. This time, though, they managed to nail it. That they actually did create this moment where you're just seeing the entire game in a completely different light right at the last minute there. And I should point out that traveling to these different areas, seeing these different maps, encountering even just different terrain and different little logistical issues in every place that you run into, feels special. When you go into Bistorius and you see those moments where nighttime is effectively hell. You go to Elheim there, and now you're afraid of forest fires. You're going into the desert, and you have to shut down entire networks of different headquarters back to back because of their underground tunnels. Like it's just a thing where every single location that you run into has so much additional character added to it, you know? They fleshed out what seems like everything, and it really makes it show that they were working on this thing for a decade, that they were giving it their all. You can feel the love seeping through every little fiber of its being. I mean, I cannot gush on the map design and the unit design and the sound design, everything is, I cannot gush on it enough. Everything from something as simple as the fact that your valor skills use an M1 grand ping for every one of the points that you use, which is just objectively one of the most satisfying sounds known to man. You have cases where every unit is ridiculously well animated, to the point that I can go watch a friggin' Arbalester shoot at things for an hour. And this is again before even getting into what seems like redundant mechanics. Like if you wanted your squads to get your kind of Fire Emblem-esque stat bonuses and things, you could just take them out to dinner, and you could do that if you want to get super min-maxy with it. Sure, you get free tickets every now and then. You get taken out to lunch by the locals for saving their town and such. But at the same time, I mean, I know personally to me, this was another one of those mechanics that it was just there for roleplay for me. Because, yeah, I didn't really care about min-maxing stats. You don't necessarily need to do that at all. I mean, hell, the final fight of the game is one hell of an ass whooper, but you don't have to min-max. You have to pay attention to your builds to actually get through that. But for me, whenever it came to the food mechanic, it was just like, wow, these guys did really well in this last fight. They're getting taken out to lunch because they were just good employees for me. There were those moments where I just had people going and joining together on teams, just because it was a cool little pairing of units and whatnot. That generally folks that are trying to play this hyper sweaty and whatever else may find it a bit on the easier side. But for the folks that just want a solidly designed RPG from top to bottom, doing a bunch of really unique stuff, letting you interact in a lot of fun ways, this is again one of the easily best SRPGs ever made. it's incredibly nice. Like right here, for example, there's slight differences on whether or not you decide to go announce yourself ahead of time to that commander there, who mostly just wanted to see the main character because she's got a crush on him. You can get ambushed by siege weapons and additional soldiers partway through this fight. But at the same time, if you were paying attention to the map beforehand, you can just go close the gate to make sure that they can't get their reinforcements through. At the same time, if you run into a map, there was actually, again, something the triangle strategy tried to do in terms of letting you explore your zone before you get into a fight. This one actually manages to bring that idea home, where if you run around the map, you'll run into these kind of red encounters, where it's just a quick 1v1 versus one of the enemy squads, and you don't eliminate them out of the fight, but you do get an idea of the kinds of units that you're fighting, and you can experiment around with ways to counter them. And this is, again, before getting into the special effects of different things here. Like, I didn't want to run my soldiers into that ballista over there, because that's what ended a previous Iron Man run. So I went and I had used a cloak on our cavalry to go hide them from aggression from those enemy units, to go sneak in and steal that ballista before they could do anything about it. The field effects, the different command effects from different units, it's constantly pulling interesting things. It's constantly trying to counter the things that you're doing. Like, that right there is actually a timing thing. I know it looks like they saw an invisible unit, which actually they might be able to, but they actually will always do that once you start getting close. Like, enemies will use these same skills that you have access to, and in many cases they'll pull a lot of really clever ambushes. Like one of those fights that I was talking about earlier, one of my favorite ambushes was when dealing with one of those fights in Bistorius, where you've got essentially ambushes. Well, you've got fights coming from both sides, and each of them makes use of different mechanics. Like, if you try to just go take out the leaders of both of those armies, if you go to the south, you find that they're just out in the open with a ridiculous amount of assist fire. Just archers, casters, everywhere else, hidden in between the rank and file, just grunts all over the place, so that they're using these trash units to essentially serve as a meat wall to go get the rest of their support fire onto your squads. Even your best squads will get overwhelmed, because even if you have an anti-archer squad or an anti-magic squad, they can only be against one of those things at one time. So the other thing will always end up getting through. You've got, if you try to go to the north, you'll notice partway through they decide to go hide all of their units in the woods. And so you're looking at your preview like, wow, I just got a quick shot with my Gryphons over here to go snipe this bear squad. Fantastic, no problems. You get there, and then the woods start rustling, and you look at your damage preview. You're like, oh no, I'm sorry, you're doing like 10% damage because you've got a bunch of archer support that's suddenly firing on you. That's going and interrupting your attacks. It's so good to see, man. Every direction, there's just love and care put into every one of these maps, into every one of these encounters. So much personalization that's been put into every one of these fights. It's great to listen to. It's great to watch. It's great to play. And like, it's one of the very, very few games that I've ever had absolutely zero regrets for actually pre-ordering, just because it gave you slightly more kind of emblem customization options before you actually end up unlocking them through the story. And I haven't even gotten into the customization. That you can customize every one of your units, even down to growths. Yes, you can recolor and rebuild, like respec all of your main characters if you want to. You can ship together whoever you want if that's your thing. If you just care about the strategy, you can ignore that entirely. Like, this is one of those examples I was talking about earlier, where these guys would have been really having an issue with that time limit up there in terms of getting that squad back into play, but switching them over to a Sellsword commander allows them to recover a lot faster, which means that they're able to keep up with the rest of the team now. But just these combinations of different support abilities in different ways, oh, God, it is such a beautiful balance in every direction. It's just, again, absolute perfection in my eyes. That doesn't mean that it's trying to punish you at every single possible opportunity. It is exactly balanced for what it wants to be, and what it wants to be is fun as hell. That, yeah, if you eventually come up with hard counters for everything, you go and get a bunch of unique equipment and very tricky builds and whatnot, you can steamroll a lot of situations. But again, fights will still ambush you. You are never immune to assist fire. There will be field effects, like they will hide landmines and shrubs and things to go and take 50% health off of a unit. There will be cases where just your caster squads will get one shot seemingly out of nowhere because they stored up a bunch of arrow rains to go and ambush them with. They will be clever. And again, for most folks, I would recommend playing on expert. It seems like if you're more casual with it, you want to go on, tactical or whatnot. Expert, I think, should have just been the difficulty with TZ mode after. Only because those limitations really let you feel just how much is going on with this system. Just let you feel how much care went into the individual systems of this game. Also, yes, there are. This is what I was mentioning earlier in terms of, yeah, there are going to be those characters. They're intentionally written to make things awkward, and nowhere is that more more so than Melisandre here. Uh, anyway, I love how even Joseph's in the background, like, what the hell's wrong with this lady? But dude, the amount of care in every square inch of this game, every little pixel, is truly remarkable. So, yeah, is it a recommendation? Yes. Easily one of the top games of the genre, no questions asked. It's brought back a series that I dearly loved for a long time, and like Tactics Ogre Reborn ended up going and being in my eyes, the perfect kind of remake that Tactics Ogre needed, and this is the perfect kind of Ogre Battle return right here. So, uh, anyways, so with that being said, that's basically all I had time for here today. Um, Again, map design, 10 out of frickin' 10. Music design, 11 out of 10. Don't even judge me, I don't care. Story design, frankly, I was expecting to do like a 8 out of 10 for that, but just the fact that they managed to pull off the ending and brought it full circle, that feels like a 9 out of 10 to me. Like, I love the politics writing of Ogre Battle. This does not try to go for politics. It does have those sort of political moments, but it does what it needs to do. It mostly manages to avert tropes in very fun ways, and for that, I respect the hell out of it. But again, stick within the long term. It does intentionally start with a lot of that tropey stuff for a reason. Um, the art design is freaking magnificent. Frankly, one of those things that to give you a perfect idea of how much care went into everything, you see that lady on the top right? She's a class that you actually see in the intro of the game, a Crusader. And their whole thing is that they actually equip 2 shields. Now you might be thinking like, oh, they just look like a weird bird thing. But there's going to be those characters that end up switching side to side and switching their equipment. Anytime you're ever looking at the art in this game, watch in cutscenes what happens when they go switching sides, because they're not just flipping the sprite. They actually went out of their way to add extra animations to make them switch hands to keep the old illusion of switching sprites, but they're actually switching their equipment every time they turn around. Again, they took more effort to make it so that that classic thing stays in place and makes a return here, rather than trying to just do the whole, oh, let's fix it thing, because shields look better when they're in the background, but the shields with the emblem on them, like, you can customize emblems for every single one of your units, you can customize outfits for every one of your units, but when the units that have emblems in front will hold their shield in front, the ones that don't will hold it in the back. Like, again, there's just that perfect detail. Every little bit and piece has that kind of attention paid to it. This is a passion project of the best kind. And, yeah. Go get it. Frankly, that's all there is to say. This game is a masterpiece. No questions asked. Absolute 10 out of frickin' 10 in my eyes. Absolute frickin' masterpiece. Alright. I gotta go. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Thank you for sticking by on this crazy ramble. And let me know when you picked it up, because it's objectively the correct choice. Alright, see ya. Bye.